This is episode 118 of the 4Ps as we head into mid-June. Over the weekend, I read a powerful, enlightening book that really impacted me in a pretty significant way called Me and White Supremacy. It came out earlier this year, written by an author named Layla Saad. And yes, that is a scary title to be reading on a beach, but it could not be more timely. And there's a lot of talk on the news and social media from well-intentioned white people like me about listening and learning and acting on behalf of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. After the intro, I'll share with you some of the things that I learned. Of course, most people don't consider themselves white supremacists, and I wouldn't think most are deliberate or even conscious of this, but we're still in a world that is defined by white supremacy. Regardless of our political views, we are complicit in a white supremacist system. So how do we know? What do we do about it? And where do we go from here? This week I lead with the practical. We hear the term white privilege, and there is an innate defensiveness. I have Black friends. I hire many people of color. And I voted for Obama, right? These are all things that people will say, white people will say. Most of these responses circle back to the idea that you and I don't need to put in the work to combat racism because I'm one of the good ones, right? But there are many privileges that white people enjoy, whether we realize it or not. Some are obvious, but there are so many more that are just not conspicuous. And I continue to learn about them, and this book really clarified a lot of it for me. I learned that white supremacy isn't about me or you. It's about the entire system in which we are inevitably complicit. We can't get defensive or be offended, but because so many white people's experiences of talking about race is so minimal, we struggle to cope with it. And some people end up casting themselves as the victim. This is the idea of white fragility, and it's ridiculous when the real victims of white supremacy are, of course, Black, Indigenous people of color. Getting people to understand that this is part of the challenge, right? And then there are the constructive things that we can be doing to become an ally in the fight against systemic racism, both conscious and unconscious. Sharing some of these things that I've learned, right, is really the purpose of this. Talking responsibly in the fight against racism means working through white fragility. It also means avoiding white silence and white apathy. These terms are exactly what you would think that they are, right? Staying silent in the face of racism or discrimination rather than calling someone out, and even avoiding the issue of racism altogether because it just seems like too much work. When white people only engage with anti-racism superficially, we get it very badly wrong. Cultural appropriation, color blindness, tokenism, and something that the author calls white saviorism. Though often well-intentioned, these are things that frequently end up exemplifying white centering, which means putting white people as the focal point of everything that we do. And that's the problem. Cultural appropriation, we know, is just another case of white culture asserting its dominance, whether through forcing its way into music or, fashion ideas or whatever it may be, and bringing them into the white mainstream. Just like with stereotyping, the result is that marginalized people stay marginalized. At a rally that I was at this weekend, I heard some white people talk about color blindness. This is the idea that you simply don't see someone's race. It's generally meant well, but intended to prove that you're not a racist. And this attitude, I've learned now, can cause great harm. Whether or not you're colorblind, white supremacy is still there, with consequences that impact specifically people of color, but probably everybody. The other one that I mentioned was, or one of two left, was tokenism, which is another superficial watch out. And it can take the form of a person or an organization, I don't know, taking on a single person of color into their company, right? And using that person heavily in promotional materials. Tokenism is frequently a substitute for real engagement with anti-racism. And then the last thing that I mentioned was, or the author mentions, is white saviorism. And that one was kind of the most kind of shocking, which is another mistake that we make that reinforces white supremacy. It's the things that we do, whether it's volunteering or social media posts, where more often than not, the focus stays squarely on white people and helping us feel good about ourselves in some way. True allyship needs to be the goal, and it requires in-depth engagement. And it starts with a willingness to acknowledge mistakes. I know I've been guilty of all the things I just mentioned at some point, I'm sure. So allyship is working in solidarity with people of color, not in one-off instances, but steadily and consistently. It involves just understanding our own privilege and constantly reevaluating our relationships with those who have less privilege. It means being open to the possibility that we're wrong about something. It means being okay with and prepared for it when we're like called out or called in, which is an important distinction. Called out is when you're challenged in public over something that you might have said, perhaps inadvertently, or offended somebody, whereas being called in is the exact same thing, but done in a private space. Real allyship involves making the struggles of Black, Indigenous, people of color our own and acting in support of them no matter what, beyond just optics. So here's what I am doing. First, I am educating myself. I'm reading up on anti-racism. I encourage everyone to do this work for themselves rather than expecting someone to just provide this information for us. And that's sometimes part of the problem, right? Secondly is educating others. Now I am beginning to do this as well based on the information that I've learned, avoiding white silence and avoiding talking to friends or family members or colleagues about anti-racism issues. Don't be afraid to bring up the topic, even with people in leading positions like teachers or managers at work. If we let white leaders perpetuate white supremacy through their tone or through that tokenism or whatever else, we're engaging in white silence. So engaging with businesses that are owned by people of color or donating to charitable causes, going to protests and marches, these are all things that we can be doing. But the hardest thing about this for us as white people is to understand that this process is not about us. And that also means taking criticism on the chin and carrying on this work even when it feels uncomfortable or tiring or personally unrewarding, because it's not. All of this really is personal, and I don't want to make this issue in any way about myself, to the point I just made. But I did have this dilemma over the weekend regarding the local protests that I was talking about here in my own town. I knew that I wanted to go and be a part of something just to show support for people in my community. Hours before one of the protests, there was some criticism that surfaced on social media channels that had been set up for the rally, expressed by Black members of the community, that this Black Lives Matter rally and march had not actually consulted Black community leaders in terms of how to organize it. And that one of the white organizers was potentially being called out as a closet racist. So if that wasn't clear what the situation was, I didn't necessarily know what to do. I reached out to people who were going, people I knew, people of color, etc., in my neighborhood. And I was on the fence even up to like 15 minutes before. But it was at least going to be worth checking out. And I'm glad I went, because dozens of fellow Black neighbors spoke incredibly passionately about things that are personal to them and ways that they need help. And that's critical for all of us to hear. And a large number of the protesters, a big percentage at least, were people of color. The COVID-related concerns were also real, but I had proper protection, and even though this ended up being the first event that I participated in beyond just being with my family in the backyard, I was extra careful. Interestingly enough, though, we are going to have to make a COVID-related decision about day camp, totally unrelated, amidst COVID concerns. So many others in terms of camps have already canceled, but ours hasn't yet. And we're waiting for what the word is going to be and a potential modified plan for risk and exposure. I'm going to leave the decision up to my wife, to be honest, as the physician in the family. But as we learn what the factors are going to be, this is going to be a tough decision that will also need to be made. The professional, and I've been meaning to talk about a topic about which I am very passionate for several weeks now, the pros and cons of brands, our clients, taking certain marketing and advertising functions in-house, and how this has actually really been exposed in terms of some of the weaknesses in this model since the COVID outbreak. But I see that I am kind of running long on time here. And instead, I just want to talk about a great networking experience that I've had over the last few weeks. I'm not a big fan of one-to-one industry speed dating. That's not what I've typically been about. But with the work from home considerations and just the increasing use of visual and virtual technology to interact, I recently accepted an invitation to join LunchClub, which is at LunchClub.ai. It uses an algorithm to pair people who have indicated certain preferences are aligned on either needs or background or opportunity or whatever. I've been doing one a week now for the past month. I've had 4, and 3 of them have actually been great. So I'm going to keep doing it. And if you're interested, I can extend an invitation to LunchClub.ai. So just hit me up for more info. And for the political, real fast. But between COVID and the gross mishandling of the recent social justice protests and violence, and now a number of leading moderate Republicans jumping ship and moving away from Trump, the polls are all starting to open up big time for Joe Biden. And this kind of scares me. I learned, number 1, in 2016 that polls are dangerous and we should not trust them. Number 2, these national polls don't necessarily reflect swing state realities, although the swing states are also starting to shift in that direction. Number 3, COVID is going to hamper voter turnout, plain and simple, and that hurts Democrats. 4, complacency among voters who think Biden may be running away with this, as happened in some cases with what happened with Hillary in 2016. It's not happening. Another recent poll among eligible voters says that 80% of them think that the U.S. is currently out of control, by whatever definition that means to them. That is a broad question to tackle, but the fact that it's gotten to this is just more proof that change is absolutely essential, and our futures kind of depend on it.